Hello, and welcome to today's webcast. Governing Azure consumption does not have to be time-consuming or difficult. Brought to you by the Insight Microsoft commercial team. My name is Blair Loveland. I am your Microsoft Readiness Specialist today at Insight, and I will be your moderator today. Before we begin, I did want to cover a few housekeeping items. This webcast is designed to be interactive between you and the presenters. The webcast console you are looking at can be completely customized. You can resize or move any of the windows that you have open. If you have any questions during the webcast, you can click on the Q&A widget at the bottom and submit your question. All questions from this webcast will be captured, and there will be a Q&A session during the last few minutes of the presentation. If you are experiencing any technical difficulties, please visit the webcast help guide by clicking on the question mark icon below the presentation window. The help guide covers common technical issues. I would now like to turn over to our presenter, Elliot Bretz. Elliot, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Blair. Good morning, everybody. I appreciate you taking the time to spend with me to listen a bit about what I'm going to call Insight Cloud Care for Azure. But that's going to cover a bunch of ground. And largely speaking, what we're going to talk about is the economics around Azure and how we manage and govern Azure from an economic perspective. Of course, that'll let us talk about some other technical nuances, but that's the big theme for today's conversation. And again, really happy that you're with us. Really happy that we're going to get a chance to talk about it. Some housekeeping items. You heard Blair indicate a minute ago that there's a Q&A box. Feel free to use it. I will try to address any questions on the fly, although I find that I do a much better job at that at the end of the webinar. Along the way, please know that Blair will be monitoring the Q&A, and if he can jump in there, he will. So we will get your answer no matter what. Really quick, just in terms of background, my name is Elliot Bretz. I've been in the industry for 24 years, something like that. The vast majority of my career and experience has been in what I like to call the Microsoft orbit. So while I have not worked for Microsoft in that 24 years, I've always worked with a strategic partner of Microsoft's, largely in either the consulting space or what I would call the systems integrator space. It's been a fantastic career, and over that time, I've seen tremendous change. A lot of common themes over the years, which has always been grounded in just what I would call good business. But again, a lot of experience around Microsoft. And of course, in recent years, I'd say in the last few years, much of my focus has been around the cloud and been around Azure. So, again, happy to have this conversation with you and talk to you a bit about what we're doing here at Insight. At Insight, I am the National Director for the United States Microsoft Commercial Business, which implies an awful lot, but largely speaking, we see ourselves as a go-to partner for our customers in the Microsoft space, driving return on their Microsoft investment. So along those lines, I like to frame this notion of getting a return on your Microsoft investment through this slide. It's always been a theme, I think, this idea of getting a return on your Microsoft investment. One thing that I've known over all these many years is that when you invest in Microsoft, very, very frequently, that's a very significant decision. It involves big dollars. It typically involves a very big commitment in terms of your technology architecture and all the things that implies. And the thing that we all know, I think, from working with Microsoft is there's very much this level of synergy within their stack. Microsoft is not one pinpoint solution. It is a stack of solutions that typically can leverage each other to create synergistic value, 1 + 1 equaling 3 or 4. The easy examples are things like, I built something that's analytical in Power BI using, a SQL database, and I'm able to socialize them, share that using Teams, and that's just a very easy high-level example of how these pinpoint solutions are able to be leveraged against each other to create this very powerful outcome. And what I've known about Microsoft over these years is that in order to really get the best return on that investment, it's critical to work with a partner, a solution provider, if you will, that is capable of working and operating within all the different, theaters of Microsoft. Whether that's within development. I'm old school, so I'll say app dev, but of course, I'm thinking in terms of all of the different, hardcore app development functionality that exists within something like Azure, and working with a partner that can really master that, and then translating that mastery around something that's, on the other end of the fence. And in this case, I'll talk about infrastructure and security and all the elements that may be found in something like that. And then, gosh, how do we move that into a collaboration conversation? So at Insight, we're able to address all of these, very complicated, involved conversations and weave them together through what we would call our practice areas or solution areas. We have 4. In no particular order, I will start with our digital innovation group, which, is very focused on that app dev conversation, and I think of things like artificial intelligence as an advanced type of discussion, or, IoT, or, really, and again, developing applications. These are all the things that resolve or, are part of our digital innovation practice. The next practice is our CDCT practice, which is our data center practice, and helping our customers really, prop up their infrastructure in a way that's going to be best serving for their business, whether that's completely in the cloud or whether that's a hybrid environment or it's their own private environment. In all these circumstances, we have tremendous expertise there. And of course, then we also have the Connected Workforce group, which is very focused on collaboration. And in that world, I think of things like 365 and Teams and all of the tools that we use today that, frankly, we've become all so, committed to in the world of Corona, where we have distributed work environments and we need to work in a very collaborative way. And then finally, we have what we would call our supply chain optimization practice, which really works with our customers to optimize how they're acquiring and leveraging all the hard technologies that, what I mean by hard, I mean actual products, the hardware to actually, fulfill the mission of technology. So together, that is Insight in terms of, all of our different practice areas. But, as in scope, we are a global organization, Fortune 500 organization that over, decades has proven to be best in class in terms of how we deliver our technical solutions. Today, if we distill that conversation into a Microsoft one, I put up a bunch of statistics here on this slide, and you can see those, and they speak for themselves. The one thing I will point out is the Partner of the Year. This year, we are Microsoft's Partner of the Year. And, it's a very special, I'll call it, credential, if you will. In all of the years that I've orbited the Microsoft universe, this is my first, day that my first year where I can say I'm part of a Partner of the Year organization. And that's a big, big thing. That's not something you just get. It's something that, is awarded after years and years of demonstrating excellence and providing, global world-class solutions to customers at many different levels. And, I'll get into that for a bit. But again, a whole great story around Microsoft at a high level that, I think helps really set the table for the conversation. One of the things that, of course, we're going to talk about today is Azure. And we're going to talk about the economics of Azure. And, that really does sprawl a bit. But one of the things that, along the lines of credentials and qualifications that I want to, again, set the table with is to establish that, within the world of Microsoft, there is a credential that's called an Azure Expert MSP. And, of course, I'm bringing this slide up because at Insight, we are an Azure Expert MSP. This is a very significant credential. There are very, very few partners that can say that they fall into this category. And, it represents a number of things. It represents that, we at Insight and folks and organizations that have this criteria have made the investments around their people, their process, and the technologies to provide a very, very high-level, sophisticated Azure solutions outcome. And I really want to denote two things. One is, A, you have to have the right people. You have to have a lot of the right people, which, in an earlier slide, you got to see some of the, we have, I think it's 1,200 Microsoft consultants on staff, about 1,000 engineers in total. We have, that kind of, capability in terms of manpower and qualifications and people, but it's more than that. It's also being able to establish and have the investments in the technology infrastructure so that we can give our customers visibility to their Azure footprint in ways that help them govern and manage those solutions. Of course, all this we'll talk about. One of the things that comes with the Azure MSP expert criteria is access to a tool set that no other partner has. And I'm really going to be careful to call this out because it's relevant to this conversation. Many of you on the call are familiar with, that vehicle that so many companies have used to acquire Microsoft technology in the past called an enterprise agreement. And enterprise agreements are, largely speaking, 3-year agreements that, if you wanted to acquire Microsoft technology, you would make a commitment to Microsoft within their stack, committing to all the many different facets of the Microsoft technology solution set, excuse me, and then committing to an annual spend. And you would be committing to making that annual spend over a 3-year period of time, doing what's called true-ups every year. As your company grew and used more of the technology, you would true up what you owed Microsoft. And frequently, what this involved was a lot of upfront spending. Going into this agreement, you would end up, making a first upfront payment sometimes in millions. Very significant payments. And Azure has been traditionally part of this. In the last 2 or 3 years, Microsoft has transitioned into a new licensing vehicle called CSP, which in essence lets their customers consume and pay for what they consume as it relates to Azure technology. So instead of in year one paying upfront for a price point by saying, hey, here's a couple $1 million, if you went into a CSP construct, you pay for what you use and you pay on a month-to-month basis, much like a utility, paying for the electricity that you use every month as opposed to perhaps paying for the year upfront. So, obviously there's advantages here as it relates to capital and cash flow management. There are other advantages. And one of those other advantages is that by going into a CSP construct, you're also afforded or given access to technology to help you monitor and manage that spend. And one of those tools is something called Azure Cost Manager. And when you go into CSP, you can get into what's called the Azure Modern Plan, and then get access to Azure Cost Manager and give you the ability to look at specific workloads and help monitor those workloads, and then, of course, govern your spending. I'll talk about that a bit. The reason I bring this up here is that the ability to migrate from an enterprise agreement into a CSP is not a trivial task. There's actual technical component to it. You're moving from one tenant to another. And there's a tool set that allows you to do that. And that tool is provided to Azure Expert MSPs. So by having this capability, by having this credential, we've had access to the tool set to allow us to help our customers move from an Azure EA into an Azure CSP. And that has been a great advantage to us and to those customers that we work with in order to do this. So, I bring all this up because A, it's relevant to the conversation, but B, frequently we see these credentials, things like, oh, we're a Microsoft Gold partner, or we're this kind of partner. And, it's important, but at the same time, it doesn't necessarily translate directly to a capability or competency. In this case, it does because of our ability to leverage that tool set. So, I won't, drain this that much longer, but the one thing I want to point out, before I move on into the real strong part of the conversation as it relates to economics is earlier I mentioned our solution areas, and I explained how important it was as it relates to, working with a partner that can help you bring those synergies forward with Microsoft. And, this slide is all about some of the awards we've received in the past, which really does speak to our sophistication, our capabilities, and our ability to really deliver from a solutions perspective. But the one that I really want to point out is, and this slide's a bit dated, we have more awards in 2020, but the one that I really surfaced up here is the Azure Security, Deployment Partner Award. And the reason I do that is because it speaks, and from my perspective, it speaks to a couple of things. One is we have the ability to deliver strong, advanced, what I would call digital solutions in Azure. Again, artificial intelligence, IoT, things of that nature. But we also have the security sophistication to ensure that whatever we're delivering with our customers from an Azure perspective is also going to be protected and it's going to be in a secure environment. We can bring the synergies of Insight to the synergies of Microsoft and deliver, again, a world-class outcome. That will become important in the latter part of this conversation, but I wanted to point that out here. Okay, so, if we talk about Azure, we really can talk about a lot of different things. And, I think if you're on this call, you probably are familiar with how powerful Azure is, what it can do, from a infrastructure as a service perspective, platform as a service, the software services that are developed on an Azure infrastructure. Many different ways for us to, kind of drill down into the Azure conversation. Again, today we're going to talk about how do you control and optimize your cloud spend? How do you increase, visibility to that spend? How do you do that within, the right vehicles? I mean, earlier I mentioned the EA versus the CSP, and that is part of the conversation as well. So that's where we're really going to drill down. And, kind of along those lines, just to underscore that there's a real issue here and real need to have this conversation. One that, I hear every day, when I'm talking to customers or talking to folks within Insight, that, and it comes in a couple of different places, but, it starts with the notion that two things are true. One is that the public cloud continues to grow very rapidly. And, this is actually a stat from Gartner that was pre-pandemic, meaning this statistic was established pre-pandemic, but the truth, and I think at this point fairly well established, is that even within the pandemic, the public cloud continues to grow and perhaps at a faster rate. And for very obvious reasons, earlier I mentioned the fact that we are now living in a, distributed workforce environment. Many companies, have invested in new landscapes where they have to enable their employees to work from home in a very collaborative way. And, frequently that correlates to a cloud-based infrastructure. So, that is one reason why Microsoft is growing as rapidly as it has been, or AWS or Google. I mean, I know, it really is a public cloud commentary. But as much as the cloud has been growing at that rate, the other thing that is true is that today's market is seeing a tremendous amount of waste as it relates to what I would call cloud consumption, in the sense that, yes, the cloud is growing. Yes, there's a lot more consumption. But what is being acknowledged is that consumption is not entirely optimized, that there's, because of the lack of people, process, and technologies within many of the folks in the marketplace, that consumption is ill-founded, or at least not optimized. And that's a big number. So you see the number here, it says $35 billion, and that's a big number. And the numbers, are fairly, kind of, if you drill down, they can become fairly staggering. And looking at that Gartner stat, I noticed that I had that up there for a bit, so I went and did some research and found a great report. So even though we are partners with Flexera, and even though Flexera speaks on its own in terms of being, a tremendous organization, I really have this slide here because, they produced a report, the 2020 State of the Cloud report, and I really would, if you're interested in this topic, I would encourage you to get this report. It's very well done. And, some of the statistics that are being surfaced up by it, again, underscore those two truisms, that the cloud continues to be a tremendous area of investment, even more than I think we would have had before the pandemic. These numbers here, you can see them here. You can read for yourself. But, as you read them, you'll notice that customers are acknowledging two things. One is that we're going to spend more money on the public cloud, and we know that the public cloud is going to exceed what we budget for it. So those are real, that's an incongruency that, our customers want to resolve. They want to be able to manage the budget tied to the cloud and manage and optimize their spend tied to the cloud. Very, very frequent conversation that we're having. So, in that conversation, excuse me, there are really three reasons why we, and there's many reasons, right? But we find that there are three common reasons why we have a conversation around misspend in the cloud. And you can see here oversized workloads, idle consumption, rogue consumption, and what do we mean by this? And very straightforward, actually. You can see how these things happen, how they develop, particularly in an industry like ours that moves very quickly. That's the thing about the technology space. The reason I've loved working in the technology space is that it's stimulating. Something's always new. It's interesting. There's always innovation. It moves very fast. That's the good stuff. The hard stuff is it's moving very fast. And when things move fast, it's very difficult for organizations to keep up in terms of having the infrastructure to really support those changes. And, we've all seen this and felt this. One of the outcomes in that regard is this notion of oversized workloads. And what I mean by that is, what you need to imagine is that any number of organizations, probably almost entirely all organizations, once upon a time, had their business working within an on-premise environment. And let's say we're born in the cloud, right? But an on-premise environment that began to move specific workloads into the cloud, either in part or in whole. And in doing that, if they did it rapidly or without a tremendous amount of planning, they very easily could have moved a workload into the cloud in a way that there was a premium attached to it. The cloud, is such a nebulous term. And whether we're talking about Azure, AWS, any public cloud, it's not a one-size-fits-all. And that's where there sometimes are misconceptions. It's a very elaborate set of decisions that go into configuring workloads within the cloud. And in making those decisions, you can almost think about them as SKUs, which is a very, I don't think, a fair way to visualize it. But, the truth is that if you pick the wrong SKU or if you pick the wrong configuration, you will be spending more money than you need to within that specific public cloud. And that happens a lot. That happens today. And it's unfortunate because, frequently with a bit of knowledge and a bit of process, that doesn't have to happen. But it is one area of waste. The other area, idle consumption, is again, very easily understood in terms of how it happens. Any of us, in this call could have a team or teams or a person that is working in this is just an example, a development environment. They're developing a solution, they're doing something within Azure or any public cloud. And they're, developing something, testing something. They may come to a conclusion that meets their expectations, and then they walk away. And, figuratively walk away, but they don't pay attention to it anymore. And in doing that, two things are, true. One is, unless they turn it off, they're going to continue to spend money. And, it's sort of like walking out of a room and not turning off the lights. And, of course, we know that happens every day in our households. I know it happens in my household, and it does. You end up spending money for something you're not getting value for. And this notion of idle consumption is very real. And frequently what we find is that's just a question of our customers or folks in the marketplace not having the tool set to see that consumption and to be able to monitor it and manage it. And then finally, the other area we have is rogue consumption. And it's not as nefarious as it sounds, but in essence, what it is, hey, gosh, I may work in a very big organization, and it could be a global organization. And there may be a team that is somehow able to, prop up a workload or an instance within Azure. And I may be paying the Azure bill, but I may have no idea that team is doing what they're doing. And I don't have any visibility to it because, again, I don't have the tool set to be able to identify that and manage it. So, these are just three narratives that we see every day that leads to some of that, that huge number of wasted spend. So, today, our customers come to us and they say, look, these are the three problems that we're having, or these are three of the problems we're having. And, we're looking to you Insight to help us identify the workloads that we have in our public cloud. Again, whether it's Azure, AWS, and so forth. Help us establish budgets tied to these workloads. And, one thing I will say is, establishing budgets is, a two-part equation in a way. In some cases, it's, hey, have the tool set to be able to establish a budget and then manage against it. But then the other is having the critical mass to be able to understand what is an expected or a thoughtful budget to establish on a workload given the size of an organization or given its industry type and so forth. And again, one of the benefits to working with a partner like Insight is that our critical mass, our substance, gives us visibility to many different environments. And it gives us the ability to pause and provide great guidance to our customers in terms of, okay, you're going to use this workload in this manner You're this type of company, this type of size. Given our experience, this sort of may make sense in terms of a budget. And, this is, again, insight. I try hard not to use this word, but it gives us the insight to be able to bring great value to our clients. And then, they ask us to help monitor, right? So this is a technology conversation. Help us move forward the right technology to monitor these public workloads, to put budgets against them, and then this last point, then to proactively govern those workloads in an automated way so that if a particular workload is going over budget, we can go through the right workflows and alerting sequences and ensure that we're ahead of that spend and we can rein it in before it gets, critical. So, there are really two flavors that, there's always many different ways to solve for things. But, in this particular conversation, there really are two flavors that I want to pull forward in terms of how do you proactively or how do you work to get an understanding of your current consumption and then be able to manage it moving forward. And I'll talk in terms of an assessment, and then I'll talk in terms of how you do this moving forward in an ongoing manner. And the assessment is probably the first place to go. And, here, this is, I think what everybody understands, when we talk about an assessment, it's a point in time. I'm going to walk into a scenario in a point in time, and I'm going to, assess the current environment and map that against best practices and knowledge and intelligence to help understand what are the gaps, what are the deltas here between the current state and best practice in order to resolve a game plan to move forward. And so we do this every day, what are called on-premise assessments, where we have a team, very strong, world-class team that does cloud-based assessments for our customers every day. And again, while Azure is a big part of today's conversation, we do on-premise cloud assessments for a multi-cloud environment. Again, Azure, AWS, Google, and frequently that brings forward great advantages because we can do a snapshot in an environment and then begin to pull forward. Okay, given what we're seeing here, you may want to take, this workload, put it into Azure, this workload, put it into AWS, and so forth, and really help you get a best-of-breed outcome. One of the benefits that we have. This team, the cloud, what we call the cloud economics team that does these assessments, works in a couple of tool sets. One tool set is what I call a light flavor, meaning that we can deliver an assessment in a matter of hours, meaning the tool will, in a matter of hours, take a snapshot and provide, the documentation that helps us work with you through a guided conversation to help understand where the gaps are today and how you can move forward into the cloud in an ideal way. And again, to be very specific, it's an on-premise assessment. So when we're running this, it's an assessment within your on-premise workloads. The result tells you how to optimize those workloads within the public cloud. And, again, you may remember if there are three areas where we run into cloud waste, one of those is oversized workloads. And this helps you really get in front of that notion of oversized workloads, making sure that what you configure in the cloud makes the most amount of sense. So, again, one of the flavors is this light flavor. We use a tool. The tool is Block64. It is the tool that lets us do this in a very quick, efficient, pragmatic way. Of course, it is the light flavor, so what that implies is that there is a much more robust assessment that we perform using a tool called Movair. And Movair takes, it's weeks instead of days, usually I think 2 to 3 weeks from what I understand. And, there are advantages, and some of this is very just straightforward, makes a bunch of sense why you would want to do a monitoring exercise using a tool like Movair over days and weeks as opposed to hours. Of course, what we all know is that you really can't capture the true run of an environment, a technical environment, in hours because technical environments, the systems that we use and, leverage every day have different experiences given any different week, month, season. Just the easiest thing to acknowledge is the holiday season. During the holiday season, there are certain, retail environments where their technology systems are at 120%, versus a 10%, or I should say 100% versus a 10%. And, that's because that's when their volume exists. And if you're monitoring at that 10% number, you're not going to really truly understand what that environment looks like throughout a given cycle. So that's why you want to go over weeks as opposed to days. Movair has certain advantages. It is a more robust tool. It does provide more data and intelligence at the end of the report. But because it is a tool that's owned by Microsoft, which is something that occurred a couple years ago, Microsoft can fund these assessments, and it does happen very frequently. So we're able to deliver an on-premise cloud-based assessment using Movair, frequently funded by Microsoft, and really give you the insight and the intelligence to make a thoughtful decision into the cloud without oversizing your workloads, giving you the confidence so that when you end up in the cloud, that you're really optimized. And, the one caveat I'll put to this slide is that Microsoft will pay for a Movair assessment with the outcome being that you move into Azure. And that, sometimes you have to say that, although it seems to make a ton of sense. Earlier, I did mention that we have a flavor of this assessment which pulls forward all three clouds, Azure, AWS, and Google. Of course, that's not paid for by Microsoft. That's a funded engagement. So beyond the on-premise assessment is what I would call a cost savings assessment, which is for those customers that are already in Azure. And this happens every day here. So what happens is we have a customer come to us and say, hey, look, I'm already in Azure, either in part or in full, but I think, when we moved over into Azure, we did it quickly, or we did it without maybe the advantages that, you may provide us. And as a result, I really do think we're spending more money in the cloud than we should be. We don't have, the tools to monitor. We feel blind. We need help. How can you help us? So in those scenarios, we have an Azure cost savings assessment that is performed by our team, the, Microsoft commercial team. And frankly, we have the luxury here to pull forward resources from many different groups to do these particular discussions. And they're very pragmatic, dialogues, right? These don't take days or weeks. They are the kind of conversations where we'll have an initial discovery with you. In that conversation, we'll identify sources of truth, sources of data that could include data from Microsoft. It could include data that you currently have. And, based on what information we're able to share and based on what we know about Microsoft, we are able to give you specific recommendations, point-in-time recommendations that will help guide you towards moving forward into a different structure. And, that could be moving into CSP, that could be moving into, different kinds of workloads. Reserved instances is a bullet that I see here that, frequently we get into these conversations where a customer is, consuming with a certain workload, qualifying for a reserved instance, which is another way to acquire Azure or public cloud in a much more cost-effective way. There are certain prerequisites to getting into a reserved instance, and you have to know what they are, and we can help you with that. And these are just examples, right? But it's important to know that whether you're in the cloud or whether you're on-prem, in both cases, we can very much help give you a clear idea of what an optimal outcome would look like. So, one of the things that I talked about earlier was this construct or this new dynamic of moving from an enterprise agreement over into a CSP licensing construct. And earlier, what I conveyed was this is the notion of instead of paying upfront for Azure through an enterprise agreement, which many organizations have done, and some still do, you can transition into a CSP, which is going to be on a consumption basis. And in doing that, it's going to give you access to certain benefits. And so, again, if we're talking about economics, one of the clear benefits to moving to a CSP is you're putting yourself in a much more cost-effective, what I would call capital optimization outcome, because you're paying for what you use as paying for something up front. And of course, in today's economy, and what I mean by that, in today's, pandemic economy, we have to be very thoughtful about every dollar. And in truth, it doesn't matter what kind of or flavor of economy, we should always be thoughtful about our spend. And the CSP flavor of acquisition of Azure really does that. That's what its most important value is that it helps you manage your spend in a cost-effective way. At Insight, what we've recognized is that CSP lets us do a couple things. Of course, it gives us the ability to help our customers spend for what they use as opposed to paying up front. But what it also does is it lets us bundle in our support services so that as you're paying for Azure on a consumption basis, you're also getting, for part of that spend, our support services. So you're not paying extra for it. It just comes with what you're spending for. So, I guess I'll say it like this. Instead of paying all up front in an enterprise agreement without the benefit of any support services in CSP, you pay for what you use and you get our support services included with what you pay for. So there's just two benefits to Azure CSP, what we refer to as Insight Cloud Care for Azure. So, one of the benefits, and there's really three core benefits to the support services that we bundle into CSP. Again, what you pay for with Azure when you pay through CSP. One of those things is what we call our Cloud Success Manager team. This is a team of folks that's dedicated to our Azure customers, and they're dedicated to optimizing your journey within Azure and within our cloud customers. I will tell you that we have Cloud Success Managers not just for Azure, but for 365 as well. And really their goal is to ensure that you're getting the best return on Azure and 365 in your cloud experience. And, these are, you can see some of the buckets here, three buckets of their function, what they do. The first is helping you and assisting you in onboarding into the Azure portal, into our cloud management environment, helping you set up and configure the technology that's going to help you optimize and monitor and manage your spend. And earlier I talked about, and bear with me, I'm going to get a sip of water here real quick. Earlier I talked about Azure Cost Manager as a tool set to help you optimize your cloud spend and how that comes as part of being in the Azure Modern Program and what happens when you move either from Azure EA into Azure CSP, or as you join and add Insight Cloud Care for Azure, you're given access to Azure Cost Manager. And what our Cloud Success Managers will do will be to help you configure your workloads within the Azure Cost Manager and make sure that you're benefiting from all the best practices so that you are able to monitor and manage your environment in an effective way. And then beyond that, what the Cloud Success Management team is going to do is work with you in a rhythm, weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, depends on every customer's a bit different, in a routine way to ensure that you're benefiting from our best practices, from the visibility that we get through critical mass to help you look at certain workloads and rationalize that against what we see very frequently. And then, of course, if you find yourself in a situation where you have questions about specific solutions or specific outcomes, we can pull in other facets of Insight to help you get the right outcome. So, if it's something where we need to pull in our DI team, we can, or our data center team, we can. We have access to these resources to help you get to a better place. And that Cloud Success Manager is going to be that person to help you do that. In addition, I mentioned some of the monitoring technology, the monitoring benefits you get with Azure Cost Manager, and absolutely that is a big tool that we use. But one of the things that it's important to understand when we look at Insight Cloud Care for Azure, when we look at the technology that we put forward as part of being in the Insight Cloud Care program, as part of using CSP, is that we're always going to move forward the best technology, the best-in-class technology for you. And, today we leverage Azure Cost Manager frequently, but we do leverage other third-party platforms as well to help our customers really get into a level of granularity in their monitoring and management, and can do it ultimately through a single pane of glass so that whether it's Azure, AWS, or both, they're able to really take a look at these things in a granular way. So this is a commitment slide that we put up here because we're always moving forward better technology to help our customers get visibility and the ability to manage their environments in a more proactive way. And then, of course, what you get as part of Insight Cloud Care, as part of your spending of Azure within CSP, is technical support. It comes with the acquisition. So again, as you're paying for Azure through consumption, one of the benefits is not just the cloud success managers, not just the access to the monitoring technology, but access to 24/7 administrative technical support for Azure. So those three things are all part of this Insight Cloud Care for Azure experience, which again, all correlates to a better economic outcome as it relates to Azure. So really a big reason why we're in these conversations. But beyond, what I would call the acquisition benefit of Azure through CSP is the notion that some of our customers come to us and they say, hey, look, how can you help us manage our Azure experience in a way that's more proactive, in a way that helps us focus on elements of our business beyond just Azure, right? So, one of the things I've always acknowledged along the way, in my career is that many, many, many times, if I'm with a customer, what is clear is that that customer is, very smart, knows their business extremely well, is very sophisticated, have made the right investments. And, over those many years, when they come to us and they said, will you partner with us as a managed provider? Will you manage specific elements of our business? It's never been that they didn't have the capability to do that. It was all a question of focus and critical mass, and, it was a strategic decision. It was more on the lines of, hey, look, you know what, we don't have the resources to focus on Azure now. We need to focus on these other strategic parts of our business, or we don't want to make the investments in the technology to monitor or optimize our Azure environments because we're making those investments with the capital in doing other things, and we don't think we have the critical mass yet for this, but we need a partner still to ensure that we're operating and optimizing our Azure environment. Will you be our managed partner? And that is what's driving a lot of companies right now to work with managed partners, particularly in the public cloud. So, earlier I mentioned this notion of security and how important it is to work with a partner that isn't just there to help optimize your experience, but also there to ensure that it's secure. And that really the middle of the slide is what I'm speaking to, is that the number one challenge with optimizing cloud model is security and making sure that you're not just propping up the right solution, but you're doing it in a secure environment. And again, that is one of the big reasons why we're being pulled into a managed exercise with our customers. So, I spoke to this slide a minute ago, and, in essence, why would you work with a managed provider beyond, just on a transactional level, like, Insight Cloud Care, CSP, and really a lot of it boils down to trust and making a decision based on where you want to bring your resources from a strategic perspective. And just to kind of finish up the conversations here and to give you some vernacular. Earlier, a couple slides ago, I explained that, when you acquire Azure through CSP, as opposed to an enterprise agreement where you pay up front, with Azure CSP, you're paying for what you use in the consumption model, and you get all the bundled services that we provide, the Cloud Success Manager, the administrative technical support, as well as access to monitoring technology. All of that is done through Insight Cloud Care for Azure in a flavor of it that we call Essentials, and that's that square on the left-hand side. That is all part of any time that you acquire Azure through CSP, working with Insight, that's what you're doing. You're using Insight Cloud Care for Azure Essentials. For those customers that come to us and they say, we want more out of this relationship, we want your help in terms of operating our Azure environment as a managed partner, we're going to talk to them about the advanced flavor of Insight Cloud Care. And you can see some of the value points that we've got underneath there in terms of patch management, incident management. I would tell you that, to me, the benefit of advanced, frequently falls in the monitoring and event management that comes with advanced. And then we do have customers that come to us and say, beyond getting us assistance on the operation of Azure, we're hoping for your help in optimizing that environment. And really the words I use there frequently is a proactive advisory relationship that helps us understand our customers' business environment and how to use Azure in a way that helps them optimize Azure for their business requirements so that, they're getting discrete advantages in the marketplace. And that's really the differences in flavor between Essentials, Advanced, and Premier from an Insight Cloud Care for Azure perspective. this slide just really breaks it down into, what I would call a different feature set. Really very much what I just said before. Essentials is that acquisition benefit, buying on consumption as opposed to, buying up front, getting a Cloud Success Manager, getting access to the, monitoring technology, working with 24/7 support. Advanced is where you get into monitoring and management. And then, of course, Premier is when you work in an advisory fashion. So, a lot covered today. I really, I think that is my last slide. It is. I really do appreciate the time that you spent this morning learning a bit more about what we're doing over here at Insight with Microsoft and Azure. And again, I'm happy to answer any questions that are out there. So with that, Blair, any questions that I could perhaps get to?
I did field a question during the call, but right now I don't see any questions in the chat window. So again, to the audience today, if you do have any questions, please use the Q&A widget at the bottom of your window and enter your question, and we will get that answered for you. So I guess we'll just hang out here for just a minute or so and see if anybody has any questions. And if you have any questions maybe after the call that you think of, you can always reach out to us. Ellie, did you want to provide did you already provide your contact information, or should we just, how did you want customers to reach out to us?
No, I'm happy to. It's Elliott, ELLIOTT .Baretz, B as in boy, ARETZ, @insight.com.
Awesome, thank you. All right, so I don't see any questions in the window, so I think we can go ahead and wrap up for today. So again, we thank everyone for joining us today. And also, please, when you go back and look at your invite you should have received from your Insight Account Executive, this is a series we're putting on with Elliott. So please make sure you register for all of our upcoming events. And we look forward to seeing you same time, same channel next month. Thank you, everybody, and have a great day.